Right. What you see is that price level 3 is greater than price level 2 is greater than price level 1. Okay, in other words, as the price level increases, the level of aggregate expenditure decreases. Why is that? So what happens is the following, or the argument goes. Remember that, okay, so the slope is not changing of those curves. What's changing is the intercept, the autonomous components of aggregate expenditure. One of those autonomous components is little a. In other words, autonomous consumption by households. Okay? What is autonomous consumption? That is savings unrelated to income. So where does that money come from that we spend? We assume it comes from past savings. Yeah? You happy with that idea? So if you're spending money that you're not earning, it somehow comes from past savings, or potentially it comes from some sort of debt arrangement. In which case it would come from future savings. Either way, it comes from savings. Okay? If the price level increases and you have some level of savings, the value of that savings will be decreasing. The real value of your savings decreases. If I have 100 Rand saved today and the average price level of everything is 1, I can buy 100 different things. If tomorrow the average price level goes to 2 and I still only have 100 Rands worth of savings, the amount that I can buy with those savings now decreases to 50. In other words, the amount that I can purchase with my savings decreases. That's the argument. That's the theory of it. Okay? And we call that the wealth effect. So we'll come back to that in a moment. So if there's a wealth effect and you have a change in aggregate expenditure shifts down. What does that mean? It means in terms of our aggregate expenditure model, and we're not looking at interest rates at all here, what is happening? We're getting lower levels of output. I don't really like this model, this particular diagram though, because it ignores interest rates, and we know that there must be an effect on interest rates. So what would happen if we wanted to combine this set of diagrams with our previous set of diagrams, which had the shift in the LM? The way that it would usually happen is the shift in LM is to the left, which is an increase in interest rates. The shift in aggregate expenditure is down, which would mean a leftward shift in IS, which would mean a decrease in interest rates. But your shift in IS would always be smaller than the shift in the LM, so you would end up ultimately with lower output and higher interest rates. Okay? That's the way it would normally happen. When prices go up, interest rates go up is the idea. In other words, the price of money also will go up in general. Okay? So what then determines aggregate demand? What are the determinants? In other words, another way of saying what are the determinants is what would shift my aggregate demand curve. So what shifts aggregate demand? Well, our determinants are the same as they were before, C plus I plus G plus X minus 7. So if for some reason there is an increase in G, there is an increase in government spending, what would be happening, if we think about the ISLM model, is a shift in the IS curve, which means at any given price level we would have a higher level of equilibrium output. In other words, our demand curve would shift to the right. Got it? So the determinants are the same as the determinants of aggregate expenditure. And then that's it. That's aggregate demand in a nutshell. Oh no, wait. There's one thing that I did not talk about. And I'm not sure why I skipped it. Yeah, slope. Oh. So, the wealth effect is what I was saying. When we change prices, there's that change in the amount that little a can purchase. As in the shift in the aggregate expenditure curve, we call that the wealth effect. Mankiw calls it the wealth effect. Okay? We also have the interest rate effect. What is the interest rate effect? Well, that was what we saw with the shifting of the LM curve, right? Money goes, with prices increasing, real money supply shifts to the left, interest rates increase. With an increase in interest rates, there will be less investment. That decrease in investment, however, was caused by an increase in prices. Therefore, it is a movement along the demand curve. A change in prices led to less investment. So we're not shifting the demand curve. We don't have less investment because of something other than prices changing. We have less investment because prices change. That would be an interest rate effect. Everyone with me on that? I'm not sure if I brought my Mankey textbook or not. Anyone got one I can borrow quickly? I can just show you a page reference to what we're talking about. Thanks. You can draw some diagrams of this as well. So what Mankey is talking about here, put it into context when you want to go back and have a read. In the aggregate demand curve, we're talking about why does the demand curve slope downwards. There's three reasons that Mankey gives: a wealth effect, an interest rate effect, and an exchange rate effect. Okay, because we are dealing with chapter 16, aggregate demand, aggregate supply, right? The wealth effect is the one that we just discussed, where a change in the price level changes the real purchasing power of your wealth, which therefore changes the amount of autonomous consumption you can make, which changes aggregate expenditure, shifts the curve up or down. Okay? The interest rate effect says that when the price changes, the interest rate goes up. Okay? In other words, price goes up, real money supply shifts to the left. When real money supply shifts to the left, interest rates go up. With an increase in interest rates, there is a decrease in investment spending. In other words, because of an increase in prices, we have less spending, we have less output. You got that? Interest rate effect. Okay? And then finally, the exchange rate effect. Exchange rate effect says that, well, there's one that Mankey describes, and then there's a sort of a much simpler one, I guess. What's called their foreign purchases effect. What Mankey describes is something that we haven't yet spoken about, which has to do with international trade. With international trade, what happens is, so prices increase, interest rates increase. Because our interest rates increase, what people want to do is they want to buy our bonds. Because they want to buy our bonds, because they're paying high interest rates, and we haven't spoken about this, so don't worry about it too much. I'm just giving you the explanation. Because people want to buy our bonds, that causes the rand, if we're in South Africa, it causes the rand to appreciate. If the rand appreciates, that means our goods are more expensive now relative to goods anywhere else. And so then people demand less of our exports because they are now more expensive. Okay? That's the complicated explanation that Mankey gives. There's a much easier explanation, which is when the price of our goods increases, our goods become more expensive relative to other goods. Which means people then want less of our goods relative to other countries' goods, so we export less. Right? So there's two different foreign purchases effect. One is directly caused by the change in the prices. The other one is slightly less directly caused by the increase in prices. Increase in prices causes a change in interest rates, which causes a change in asset allocation, which causes a change in exchange rates, which causes a change in exports and imports. Okay? Are you happy that all of these things are caused by a change in price? It's a change in purchasing power because of a change in price. That's the key thing. If we're plotting output against price, what we want to know is what happens to the level of output, or the level of expenditure, the level of expenditure if prices change. And what we see is that when prices go up, the level of expenditure decreases because of these different effects over here. Everyone happy with that? Great. What I would like you to do then is an exercise. So, in groups with a piece of paper and some pens. Okay? What I would like you to do is draw a demand curve. Just a demand curve. Okay? Remember, don't get too excited about it, just draw a demand curve. Okay? Nothing special about this thing. It doesn't need to be in different colors, and it certainly does not need to be done with a ruler. So now you have a demand curve. I'm going to give you 3 different scenarios, or 3 different things are going to happen, and I want to know, given your demand curve, what the effect is going to be on that demand curve. Okay? So, the first thing is the following. There is an increase in investment. So number 1, an increase in investment. And that increase in investment is because people are suddenly happier with the economy, but nothing to do with prices. There's an increase in investment. What happens to your demand? So think about that for a moment, draw something, and then I'll give you scenario number 2. Oh, you know what will make this easier? On your very first demand curve, draw some point. You are at some point on your demand curve. It doesn't matter where you are, just draw some point. Call that point A. Now what I want you to do at the end of scenario 1 is I want you to draw point B. Somewhere draw point B. Okay? Where would you be after scenario 1? Draw point B. Let's do scenario 2. Scenario 2. Once again, there is an increase in investment. What's happened this time is that a decrease in prices has led to a decrease in interest rates. And that decrease in interest rates has fueled investments. Now I want you to draw a new point, call it point C. So where is point C now relative to points A and point B?
Sorry, can you please repeat that?
Scenario 2, there is an increase in investment because what has happened is prices have decreased, and because prices have decreased, interest rates have decreased, and that decrease in interest rates has led to an increase in investments. That's scenario 2. Happy with that? Okay, let's do scenario 3. Scenario 3, there is a decrease in investments. Okay, investment is going to go down, decrease. Except that this change in investment is due to 2 different things. Number 1, prices have increased, which has led to an increase in interest rates, and so investment has decreased. But number 2, people are also just very unhappy. What led to the increase in prices, in fact, was a decrease in aggregate supply because oil prices went up. And oil prices went up because there was war happening somewhere. We'll say it again, I'll say it again. Right? There's a war happening somewhere, and so the cost of fuel has risen, so prices have gone up, and because prices went up, interest rates went up, and so investment went down. But because of this war, people are also very unhappy and they just don't want to invest. Okay? So, I'll repeat it one more time. Scenario 3, there's a decrease in investment. Why has investment decreased? It decreased, 1, because prices increased, and 2, because people are just very unhappy. Okay? And draw that, label that point D.
Oh my god.
Okay. So you've got a demand curve. And we said you had some point called a point A. Scenario 1, there was an increase in investment, but it had nothing to do with prices, right? So what you should have is a point B. There was no change, we don't know anything about prices, so point B, we would shift our demand curve from D0 to D1, and there's no reason why point B should be at any different price level because we don't know anything about prices. all we know is that at any given price level, there is an increase in investment. So at price level, call it P0, we now have a higher level of output, Y. Let's say this was Y0, we now have some new level of output, YB. So I call this YA. Okay? Scenario 2, we had an increase in investment, but this increase in investment was caused by decrease in prices. So if you started at point A, you can start at point B if you wanted, but if you were at point A, you now would have point C along the same demand curve at a lower price level but with the same level of output. If you assumed you had moved to point B, that's fine, you would now be at point C, somewhere down there, whatever. It just depends on what your starting point was. Starting at point A, your new point C would be along the same curve as point A. If you were starting at point B, your point C would be at the same point along the same demand curve as point B. We then had a decrease in investment due to both an increase in prices and a decrease in investment due to other reasons. If we were starting up.
So, let's see. It's an increase in price.
Sorry, investment. What do you mean? Yeah, so if we were at A, price went down. Because of price going down, output went up, investment went up. So movement's along the demand. It's not a shift. It's because of the change in price level. If there's a change in output due to a change in price, it is a movement along a demand curve. We're not shifting. That's the key lesson. Yeah. Yeah, no. And that's the point. It doesn't shift. It has to be a movement along the same, whatever curve you are on, it is a movement along that curve. We don't shift the demand curve when there's a change in investment due to a change in price. That is called the interest rate effect. A movement along the demand curve. Change in price level causes a change in interest rate, which causes a change in investment, a movement along the demand curve. This distance here, just by the way, not sure what happened here. This over here is the change in investment. From YA to YC. That is a change in investment. Yeah? Happy with that? So then we had to choose another point D. What happened was if we were starting at point A again, we shifted our demand curve to the left, so we now have D2. This would represent a decrease in investment, not due to price levels. Then we also have a decrease in investment due to price levels. Which means relative to point A, we have a lower level of output and a higher price level. Because there were two components to that third scenario. One was a change in investment because of a change in prices. The other was a change in investment because of a change in investor sentiment, not related to prices. Which means we've got a shift in the demand curve and a movement along. Another way you could, this is point D here. The other way you could have got to point D if you wanted to was just shift from point A to some intermediate point and then across. Or you shift across and then move up. Either way, there's a movement along one of those curves and a shift in the curve as well. And I specifically chose investment to point out the fact that it's change in prices because if change in investment is because of change in prices, that is the. Okay, everyone happy with that? Any issues? Okay, so that brings us to the end of aggregate demand. Which gives us another 20 minutes to tuck into supply. What I think I would actually like to do here is just start at the beginning so we can recap a little bit some of the things that we've already done in terms of aggregate supply. Yeah. If the change in interest, because of the change in price, if the change in interest happens irrespective of the change in price, then you've got a movement of demand that shifts in price demand. If the interest changes because of the price change, then it's moving along. Yeah. Sorry, can I just hear this question? Yeah? What's the difference between the two? The IS curve plots the relationship between interest rates and output. Aggregate demand curve plots the relationship between prices and output. You got it? Did that not answer your question? I'm sensing there's some deeper misunderstanding going on there. Okay. Let me show you potentially what the relationship is between the what's the difference between an IS curve and an AD curve? Maybe this will clear things up. I don't know. So we started at some point A on our demand curve. Okay? Corresponding to this demand curve, we have some IS curve. And let's say we were at the same level of output. Okay? Equilibrium somewhere. We also have an LM curve. We don't have an AS curve in this one yet. Okay? Now I tell you that prices increase. Because prices have increased, there's a change in interest rate. And that change in interest rate causes a change in investment. Yeah? What happens is prices increase. As prices increase, our LM curve shifts to the left. Interest rate goes up. Because interest rates go up, right? We're moving along an IS curve, change in investment. And because it was because of a change in prices, we're moving along a demand curve, change in investment as well. Okay? They're the same. Now I'm going to tell you interest rates change. So if we start, this was scenario 1. Okay? Well, not scenario 1, but previously this is a new scenario 1. Okay? Call this one scenario 5, whatever it is. Now interest rates are going to increase, but interest rates are increasing not because prices are changing. So we are at this point here, and interest rates increase. Right? And those interest rates are increasing not because price is changing, but as an example, let's say that there was an increase in, let's say there was a decrease in money supply, sorry. So a decrease in money supply would shift our LM curve, right? But now this shift is not because of an increase in prices. So we've got a decrease in investment, not because of a change in prices. What happens is at the same price level, we've now got a different level of output. So we've moved along the IS curve, but we've shifted the aggregate demand curve. Right? As a final point, what could happen is we have an increase in investment that shifts the IS curve. The shift in IS because people just want to invest more, irrespective of the interest rate. So that there's an increase in IS. That increase in IS leads to an increase in interest rates. That increase in interest rates leads to a crowding out of some of that investment. Okay? So we get to a new point. Again, nothing to do with price level change. And so now we've shifted the IS curve and we've shifted the aggregate demand curve. Now maybe think about that for a while. Okay. Everyone happy? So when we're talking about labor supply, there's a couple of things we need to talk about. The production function, labor markets, and ultimately we'll get back to this idea of full employment. How many of you have read that Blanchard reading on the labor market? Because remember the tutorial for last week, which is only due then next week, doesn't mean that you don't need to read the things for the tutorial before coming to the lecture. Otherwise, when you do the lecture, you're going to go, what are we talking about? Before Friday, it's a good idea to read the readings for this week so that you're not left behind. So production function, what does the production function have? It's got capital, human capital, any other natural resources, technology, human capital, we're talking about labor. So what is the connection? So those are the different physical capitals. What is the connection between the labor market and the production function? The point of equilibrium in our labor market gives us the amount of labor that would be used in the production function. So holding some level of capital constant, we would have a production function that increases at a decreasing rate. Why? Because the marginal productivity of capital and the marginal productivity of labor is diminishing. So given some level of capital, as we employ more laborers, so they become, so the change in their marginal product, so we say the increase in their marginal product gets less and less. Until eventually their marginal product in fact starts decreasing. So equilibrium in our labor market gives us some points in our production function. That equilibrium point would be if we took our production function which plots output against price level independent of price level. So our long run aggregate supply curve, the amount of output that we can supply sustainably is independent of the price level. That is the long run aggregate supply curve. That is the point of full employment. That is what we call potential output. Right? So potential output is some level. Doesn't matter what the price is, potential output is some amount. Okay? Full employment occurs at some level of output. Doesn't matter what the price level is. So in terms of the supply of goods and services, in the long run, it doesn't matter what the price level is, there's some amount that we can supply. And the amount that we can supply is determined by the amount of capital we have, the amount of labor that we have, and the amount of other inputs into the production function. Right? So again, natural resources, technology, all those different things that determine the production function. So if we're going to focus then on labor, let's talk about that labor market. In fact, when we're talking about labor, what we're really interested in is unemployment. So Blanchard starts with a very simple production function and a very simple labor supply and a very simple labor demand function. Okay? What is his production function? His production function is simply Y equals N. N equals the number of people employed. So if I have 10 people employed, how much output would I be producing? Y equals N. And N equals the number of people employed. If the number of people employed equals 10, what is my output? 10. You happy with that? If N equals 10, Y equals 10. That's our production function. What that production function does not have in it, and this is why it's a very, very simple production function, is it doesn't have any kind of diminishing marginal returns. What would that look like if you were to plot it? If you were to plot number of people employed versus output, what does that function look like? Y equals N. Just a straight line going straight out of the origin, right? What did we just say that the production function looked like? We just said that the production function is increasing at a decreasing rate. Is that what this equation is doing? Here, no, this one's just constant. So I say it's very simple. Okay? There are no diminishing marginal returns in this particular example. It makes life easy. We can make it more complicated later. Then he says, okay, let's talk about households. If households supply labor, they supply labor according to the wage that they get. Okay? And if we assume that they will supply more labor the higher their wage, then we can put that down mathematically. In other words, what he's saying is the following. If you're going to get paid £1 a day, you're probably not going to be that keen to work. If you're getting paid 100 Rand a day, maybe you're going to work. You're getting paid 1,000 Rand a day, you're pretty keen. You're getting paid 1,000,000 Rand a day, you are working that day. But here's the thing. If you're getting paid, and this is quite interesting, this is what actually happens in terms of behavioral kind of the way that people work generally. If you were getting paid 10 million Rand a day, you would only work for like 100 days, then you'd be like, you know what? That's it. There is a certain wage above which you actually choose to work less. Because you're like, I'm earning so much for what I'm doing, I don't even need to work that long. And I get the amount of money I need. So, anyway. So, apart from that extreme where if you get paid so much it doesn't matter, generally the more you get paid, the more you're willing to work. Let's just zoom in here. So what he says is the following. If we look at the real wage, which is W over P. Okay, don't worry about the little E for now. So W over P, that's your real wage. It's your wage adjusted for prices, right? Your real wage is inversely related to the unemployment rate and is directly related to some other thing which he calls Z, which is just anything else that makes you want to work, right? If you want to work, then there's something called Z which makes you want to work, whatever that might be. Maybe you need money. I mean, not money, sorry. Maybe you need income for food, right? In which case, you need food, you need to work, right? And the more you need that food, right? Depending on the price of that food, the higher that price is, the more the wage you want, right? If you need food and the price of food is going up, you need your wage to be going up. So there's a bunch of things that say, right, whatever whatever Z is, affects my real wage. And I'm talking about not the nominal price of food, I mean if the real price of food is going up. Then it's negatively related to the unemployment rate. So then he says, well, in an undistorted market, the more people are unemployed, the lower the wage you would have to accept in order to get employment. Because the fewer people there are employed, in other words, the more people there are relative to the jobs available, the more competition there is for those jobs. If you want that job, you have to offer your labor at a lower price. Which is to say, the higher the level of unemployment, the lower the wage you would be willing to accept. In a market that's not in any way distorted by things like minimum wage laws or anything else like that. Okay? You happy with those ideas? You happy with that specification? Real wage is inversely related to unemployment and is positively related to some other stuff. Right? This little E then, what he says is, and we start moving into a very fuzzy space. Dude with his phone, whose name I actually don't know. Yeah? What's your name? Doug. Dan. So, Dan, your discussion earlier was, you raised the point earlier in the course about perfect competition, perfect information, and the way that this thing adjusts immediately and how that was potentially a little bit weird. So at this point, Blanchard says, okay, let's think about this for a while. What happens if you set you're welcome to go back to your phone. Don't let me interrupt you.
I was talking about
Okay? As long as it's for educational purposes. So what he says is the following: when you get employed, you get employed in terms of a wage, and you agree on that wage today. You then give your wage services for some amount of time, right? And it's only at the end of that period that you actually get paid your wages, and then you go out and buy. Which means you set your wages today based on what you think prices will be tomorrow, if that's when you get paid. In other words, that little E means it's your real wage given your price expected, right? In other words, what you think prices will be. So what he does, and we'll talk more about this, is he starts introducing this idea of market rigidities. So what happens when prices and things don't adjust immediately? What happens when expectations don't equal what we actually get? Which, in a way, is kind of going right back to the beginning when we said that the thing that got Keynes really worked up was he said, look, prices don't adjust immediately. So if we assume prices are fixed, what's going to happen? And that was why we had prices fixed all that time, because the point was, things happen in the economy and prices do not adjust immediately. Whereas the classical economists of the time would just say, remember, prices adjust, wages adjust, it all sorts itself out, let's go have a beer. Okay, so we've now got a labor supply equation, because what we're doing now in the labor market is we want to plot quantity of labor against price of labor, and the price of labor is the wage. And what we're saying here is that the wage and unemployment are inversely related, which is the same as saying that wage and employment are positively related. So you see we've got a labor supply curve. You got that? We've got a relationship between the quantity of people of labor supplied and the price of labor, wage. And then he says labor demand, but I'm thinking, because it's only got 5 minutes, we might... well, let me tell you what labor demand is, and then we'll talk more about it. We'll start here again on Friday. So what he says labor demand is the following. Firms need to pay people wages. And they're going to pay people wages according to what they produce. You happy with that? Okay? Now, if we've got y equals n, there's no diminishing marginal returns. People just, one person produces one thing of output. Right? You happy with that? So in that equation, we've got the number 1. That at the top. What's that? The number? Numerator, yeah? So the numerator is 1, which is to say that's what you produce. So the more people produce, the more they would get paid. So if that number 1 was higher, they would get paid more. In other words, if our production function wasn't y equals n, it was y equals 2n, then that number on the top there would be 2. What is it divided by? Well, the firm says, cool, I'm not going to pay you everything that you produce because I need to make some kind of profit. And the profit I make is going to be the difference between what I pay you and the price that I sell it at. And the price that I sell the stuff that you produce at and what I pay you is called my markup. Right? So the firm has a markup. The markup is the firm's profit. The firm's markup is called mu, that little u thing there. It's the Greek letter mu. MU. Okay? So the higher the markup that the firm wants, the lower the wage it's going to pay people. You happy with that? In other words, the higher the profit that the firm wants to take, the lower the wage. So the more someone produces, the higher the wage. The more the firm wants to take as a profit, the lower the wage. Pretty straightforward, right? Okay. We're going to leave it there.